Okay. Hey guys, please. So look, here's the deal. We're gonna go over bureaucracy. It shouldn't take me too long to get through the small part that I want to get through today, and then we'll talk about influences on the bureaucracy on Monday, and we'll finish the PowerPoint on Tuesday. You have a test on Wednesday. Okay. This PowerPoint is a grand total of 39 slides, which I know still kind of seems like a lot, but well, yeah, but you're also going to get the bureaucracy, the judicial branch as part of it.
When is the test?
Yeah, it's judicial.
What?
Is it legislative also?
I'll be honest with you. There's actually a little bit about the president and Congress on there. I mean, obviously, you just took a test on the president and Congress total, but to come up with another 60 questions just on the judicial branch and the bureaucracy is a little bit of a stretch. And sometimes it's hard to talk about one without talking about the others. But in reality, I didn't want to put all four of them together in one test because there's just not enough there. I mean, you could know a great deal about all four of these and still fail a test because you just got the wrong questions. All right. So, federal bureaucracy. What we'll cover today, some of it is a little bit of history that you've noticed I generally tend to move through very quickly. And then some of it will be sort of structure and functionality and things like that, right? The powers of the bureaucracy and how the powers have changed. Up until the late 19th century, we know that most bureaucratic, well, not most, pretty much all bureaucratic positions were filled by the president, right? Do we remember from APUSH last year, Andrew Jackson establishes the spoils system, right? And a president's first couple of months in office, he just meets with a whole bunch of people that helped him get elected, and they go, hey, I would like to be the Postmaster General of Georgia. And he goes, okay, you have that job, done. Right? Do we remember that concept? All right. So that's how it used to happen. Which is not really just or fair, and it didn't really, it definitely wasn't efficient either. The only thing that you could say for it that's actually a positive is you would ensure that the people that were in bureaucratic positions are actually loyal to the president and willing to carry out the president's sort of agenda and goals and whatnot. All right? Eventually what happens is we have a president that's assassinated. So this is Garfield. He's assassinated in the late 19th century, and he's assassinated solely based on somebody's perceived injustice of being given a position that was beneath them. Okay? It's absolutely just sort of asinine comical. All right? The fact of the matter is that this is not something that makes a lot of sense to us today. Right? Obviously, as we have progressed as a society, we don't go around shooting the President of the United States because we somehow think the President insulted us with a position that was beneath us. Okay? But I want you to understand, at least historically, because I think this is also fairly interesting just from a sociological perspective, that this mentality, one, is a very old school Southern antebellum ideology. Right? I mean, if we go back and we look at sort of the foundation of the United States, one of our founding fathers was a guy named Alexander Hamilton. And how did Hamilton meet his maker? He got shot by whom?
Aaron Burr?
He was shot by Aaron Burr in a duel. Because apparently they insulted each other, and they figured the best way to get over said insult was to shoot at each other with pistols. And now some of you laugh and you chuckle and you think that that's funny, but not really the case, right? Because you actually see that still happening regularly in society today. In fact, we talked about, well, at least we started to talk about the idea of stand your ground laws as it pertains to the guy who shot these 3 kids in Oklahoma. Okay, stand your ground laws are actually used regularly in a place like Florida, Miami-Dade County, where you have a fair amount of gang violence. gang members will basically shoot at each other, and then whoever's left standing just kind of waits for the cops. And then the cops show up, and he goes, oh no, I was just standing my ground, he shot at me first. The cop goes, oh, alright, there's nothing I can do, I'll just go on. Right? And why did they start shooting at each other in the first place? Because one of them disrespected the other. And it's a ridiculous premise to most of us, but if you go into sort of impoverished areas in the United States, right, you see this far more frequently, right? And it tends to be from a specific subset of the American population that has this really sort of like antebellum Southern ideology about the importance of respect in life. Right? I used to break up fights regularly at my old high school. And when you would ask the kids, like, why did you do that? Because he disrespected me. Which I found to just be astounding, because literally the kid who just fought somebody because they were disrespected, the same kid used to disrespect me 4 or 5 times a day in class. Right? Did I go slap him? No. But for a specific subset of the population, that idea of respect and right, being insulted is enough to physically harm another human being, right? Which is how we get into this whole Civil Service Act and civil service reform, and the idea that this is now going to be outside of the president's hands, because it just becomes sort of ridiculous. Especially when you consider the amount of positions that would have to be filled today. That's really absurd. The president had to do all of that all by himself, right? Today, more than 90% of our federal employees or our civil service workers are filled by the civil service system. All right, they're not appointees. The appointees tend to be our top level bureaucrats, people that are running agencies or are at least high up or high level in the individual agencies, right? So when you look at like the Department of Justice, for instance, which we covered with the last unit, the Attorney General, the Solicitor General, and even U.S. District Attorneys are all appointed by the President, right? These are appointed positions rather than filled through the civil service. And so that leads to those positions being sort of political in nature, but obviously the President of the United States is not wasting his time hiring law clerks for his various U.S. District Attorneys, all right? When you look at the bureaucracy, our bureaucracy has really not changed in size. Our federal bureaucracy is roughly the same size that it was since 1950, which actually says a lot, considering since the 1950s we've added all sorts of various agencies, right? The Department of Education, for instance, is not added as a federal agency until 1953. And in your lifetime, we've added another one, which was what? Department of Homeland Security, right? So DHS has been added since that point in time, and obviously these increase the sort of scope of the bureaucracy. It increases the power of the bureaucracy, yet shockingly or surprisingly, the number of federal bureaucrats that we have is relatively unchanged, which means we lose people from one agency or one sort of aspect of the bureaucracy as we add new positions and new agencies. Right? So theoretically, this means that if we have more agencies and more authority and more power and more regulations, the bureaucracy is really good at its job, right? Because we don't have to add more people to do it. Do you agree with that statement? Bureaucracy good at its job? Yes? So when you went to the DPS, they got you your license in like 4 minutes? Yeah?
Depends what time you go.
Yeah, you sign up online.
Once it took me an hour and a half to go through that one. Because I didn't have the right paper, I had to go back home, come back.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot. It's like 30.
So from the point that you checked in, whether it was online or in person, to the point that you were done at the DPS was only a matter of minutes?
Well, I signed in, and then like before I even got there, it said you're ready to go.
But even if you
There's
sign
like
in, you can
days when
still
the
wait.
DPS is like empty.
Well, I'm sure there are.
They may
Yeah,
fix
and that's
it
when I go.
now, but when I was there,
Right? But there are also days where if you go to the DPS, it takes you 4 hours to get there.
Yeah.
But
Friday.
if you sign in online, it's roughly about 25 minutes, which gives you enough time to drive there. And so by the time you get there, you can get in pretty quickly.
Okay. Well, that's more efficient than what it was,
Yeah.
right? But obviously, a decade ago, you didn't have that opportunity. You couldn't sign in online. And at times, our bureaucracy has gotten better, but you should realize that if it's not really efficient, and I think most of us would agree that bureaucracy is not really efficient. Okay, just wait until the first time you try to fill out your own tax returns. Right, not an easy thing to do. I mean, it's not that hard, but probably a little bit more difficult than what it needs to be. Yes? I mean, literally, you have multiple companies like H&R Block and Jackson Hewitt and Liberty and all sorts of people that their sole purpose in life is to fill out and prepare other people's tax returns. Because the IRS, that bureaucratic agency, is that difficult to understand. Alright? What happens though, or what you should realize, is the bureaucracy really is not efficient. And it's honestly, while it might have gotten more efficient in some manners or aspects, as a whole the bureaucracy is not more efficient. And the reason that we have not increased the size of the federal bureaucracy is because instead we are increasing the size of local or state bureaucracy. Alright? Now the various powers that the bureaucracy has. We've talked about this idea of discretionary authority before, right? We have vaguely worded statutes from Congress, vaguely worded laws. The various agencies get to interpret that for itself, right? And through that, they can pass its own rules and regulations. When we talked about Congress, we talked about the fact that Congress doesn't create their own laws anymore. They don't even write their own bills anymore. A lot of the times they're actually written by the various agencies, by the various bureaucracies. All right. Another reason, or another aspect of the power here, power has grown. Obviously, we've talked about this before. As we increase the population of the United States, that increases sort of the scope of the U.S. government. The U.S. government is now responsible for more as a result of that. Additionally, new technologies lead to an increase in bureaucratic power because new technologies lead to some sort of response or necessary response by the United States. Right? So for instance, and this is really an international example rather than a national one, right? But if a United Arab Emirates flight leaves Istanbul, Turkey, traveling to, I don't know, Madrid, Spain, right? When the pilot of the flight is approaching Madrid, what language does he speak to the air traffic control tower in? Wrong. Wrong.
English.
What?
English.
English. Right? And these are issues that agencies have to oversee and ensure. Okay? Because obviously your United Arab Emirates pilot, right, might not be fluent in Spanish. Or if he's flying to Rome, Italy, he might not be fluent in Italian. Or if he's going to Moscow in Russia, whatever. Okay, so there has to be some sort of standard, because that's a really sort of stressful job. Air traffic controller is, at least. I don't know about pilot. And, but air traffic controllers are responsible for sort of directing all planes that are in their general vicinity. Okay. Pilot?
Yeah.
They don't drive the planes. They just press a button and then just go. So you just lean the seat back and get a drink. Out the window.
Of water. Of water. You can't drink
I
out
know
of
that, but they lean out. They look out the window for a couple hours.
for growth, we've talked about this concept. So we talked about this concept specifically with the Republicans' inability to get rid of Obamacare, right? Americans have increasingly sort of expected the government to do more for them, and that affords bureaucracies more power. Additionally, once something's been created, it's incredibly difficult to get rid of in government. And again, this is proven with Obamacare, right? We created something and now it's really hard to do away with it. All right, as far as the influences on its behavior, we talked about this a second ago. So most bureaucrats get their job through the civil service. The real way, the manner in which that happens, is a lot of the times you have some sort of merit-based system. So we'll take the FBI, for instance. Let's say anybody in here want to be an FBI agent or think they might want to be? Fair enough. Okay. In order to get that position, you're going to take some sort of standardized test that's going to test how well you understand like law and the provisions of law enforcement. With that, you'll also take some sort of physical fitness test, because obviously law enforcement agents need to at least have some sort of physical fitness, right? Apparently less and less anymore, but theoretically you'd want them to. I would assume there'd be some sort of proficiency for marksmanship. All of those things together would be utilized to calculate some sort of score, right? And then when they look to fill positions, they basically just list everybody by their score. They've got 20 jobs, they count down 20 scores, draw a line, and those people get their job, right? So that's basically how they get their position. Now there are ways around it. This example is not national bureaucracy, but rather local bureaucracy. When I taught in San Diego, the San Diego Unified School District had all sorts of like financial problems. They used to basically pink slip or fire roughly a third of their teachers every June. And then in the fall, they would come back and hire back as many as they needed. Because there's a very powerful teachers union in San Diego and California in general, what used to happen is that, like, if your school had an opening for biology, you had to go to the list of fired biology teachers, and you had to hire whoever had the most seniority. Like, that's it. Your principals did not get an option in who they wanted to hire. And so principals figured out a way around this. One of the ways that they would do it is the way that they would write the job qualification, right? So I got my position because the school that I worked at said that they needed a teacher who was licensed to teach one section of algebra, one section of geometry, one section of English 3, one section of U.S. history, and one section of economics, right? And I was actually licensed to teach all of them. Most English teachers not licensed to teach math, right? And so the manner in which you create the position allows you to create a position that's really sort of specifically tailored to the individual that you want. As far as the federal bureaucracy goes, one of the easy ways around it is to make a temporary position and then just refill or renew that temporary position for as long as need be. Okay? Other ways to sort of bring in the people that you want is you bring somebody into a lower level job, then give them the actual job that you want them to have, and then basically once they've met the requirements of having been in bureaucracy long enough, you give them the actual promotion. Additionally, you can provide bonus, I should say points, not pints. Bonus points for various things. So like the FBI, the example that I used a minute ago, if you were a veteran of the military, you would get extra points on your score for having been a veteran. If you spoke multiple languages, depending on the language, you can get bonus points for that. So like if you were fluent in Arabic, for instance, you get more points than if you were fluent in Spanish, right? Because obviously one of them is very common, the other one's not. So also understand that with all of it in terms of like retention, it's really difficult to fire bureaucrats, all right? All of this results in bureaucrats being very loyal to their agencies. And then when you look at the actual sort of makeup of bureaucrats, low-level and mid-level bureaucrats tend to represent the U.S. as a whole, right? So both male and female, all races, all religions, all that good stuff. When you look at upper level bureaucrats tend to be middle-aged white guys, right? Generally middle-aged, well-educated white guys. And so what you have is you have a system here, or an instance in which the liberals will make the claim that it's sort of middle-aged white guys in the good old boy network, and so the bureaucracy is really conservative and they only care about like rich white guys. And the conservatives will look at the bureaucracy and be like, dude, those rich white guys all went to Harvard, so that's a really liberal school. They're a bunch of liberal hippies, right? And basically everybody hates the bureaucracy and everybody thinks the bureaucracy is out to get them. Studies have actually determined that bureaucracy tends to be more liberal than what it is conservative, but that also is a sort of statistic that's a little too broad, right? If you look at the individual agencies, some agencies have wildly liberal bureaucrats and other agencies have wildly conservative bureaucrats, right? The EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, do we think the bureaucrats there are conservative or liberal? Liberal. What? And for the Department of Defense, do we think the bureaucrats in the DoD are liberal or conservative? Conservative. Absolutely. All right. And then you should understand most bureaucrats, and this might strike some people as a little surprising, the vast majority of bureaucrats do not live in D.C. All right. They live throughout the United States. Some of the constraints that bureaucrats have, right? The Freedom of Information Act. Everything that the government does is public record. In fact, I don't know if you're aware of this, but Donald Trump has actually been getting in trouble for deleting tweets. I find that comical. But that's actually a crime. Believe it or not. Okay? Him deleting his own personal tweets on his own personal Twitter is actually a violation of law. Because he's violating the Freedom of Information Act by getting rid of that stuff. The Hatch Act we've talked about before, bureaucrats are not supposed to be political. So Comey may or may not have violated the Hatch Act by talking about the investigation into Clinton right before the election. RBG definitely violated the Hatch Act in bad-mouthing Trump right before the election. All right. And then as far as organizational constraints goes, agencies are really, really big. So it's really hard for one individual to sort of shake things up or do something that's bold or try to change their procedures. There's a lot of red tape in terms of bureaucracy, which simply means restrictions or rules that people have to go through in order to get things done. And then there's really no incentive to being good at your job, right? Like if we go back and we think about the DPS, if a DPS agent gets through like 30 customers, I don't even know, what would you call them? Clients? I have no idea. 30 people. Let's just call them people, right? If one DPS agent gets through 30 people in an hour and another DPS agent gets through 2 people in an hour, right? Does the person that gets through 30, do they make more money? Do they get some sort of bonus? No. Right? In fact, the bureaucracy, there's incentives in the bureaucracy to really not actually work that hard for that reason, right? Because there's no advantage to doing your job well. Especially when you consider the part of that merit system, or the merit exam system in order to get promotions. Some of it just basically has to do with how long you've been there, right? Okay, that's all the further I wanted to get today.